could a soul like that be capable of?
The Ultramarines are more than just a Space Marine chapter. They are an institution, a symbol, and to many, the very definition of what it means to be an Adeptus Astartes. To their admirers, they are the shining example of the Emperor's vision, a force of disciplined, tactically brilliant warriors whose influence extends far beyond the battlefield. To their detractors, they are the embodiment of rigid orthodoxy, a sterile and overly structured force lacking individuality. But to the Imperium, the Ultramarines are the wall upon which the tide of darkness crashes and breaks. Their history is vast, their lineage unmatched. Where other legions were broken by the Horus Heresy or fell to corruption, they remained unyielding, all while holding fast to the ideals instilled in them by their Primarch, Roboute Guilliman. They are master tacticians, the most adaptable and well-organized warriors in the Imperium, not bound by savage blood rites or nihilistic dogma, but by the razor-sharp edge of strategy and the unbreakable steel of duty. They are soldiers, yes, but also statesmen, leaders, builders, and visionaries. This is the story of the Ultramarines, the defenders of mankind, the sword and shield of the Imperium, the sons of Guilliman. The origins of the Ultramarines, like all Space Marine legions, begins in the fires of the Emperor's grand vision, the creation of warriors who would conquer the stars and unite humanity under one banner. The 13th Legion was one of 20 gene-forged armies designed to bring about the Imperium's dominion in the Great Crusade. Every legion was crafted from the genetic material of a Primarch, and the 13th were no different. Their gene seed was drawn from Roboute Guilliman, though at the time of their inception, the Primarch himself was lost, one of 20 stolen from the Emperor's laboratories and scattered across the galaxy by the Chaos Gods. Unlike some of their more volatile cousins, the 13th Legion's gene seed was stable, reliable, and remarkably free of mutation, producing warriors of exceptional discipline and cognitive ability. The Emperor's plan for the 13th Legion was to create a force of pragmatic, methodical warriors, capable not just of conquest, but of governance. The 13th were not berserkers like the Warhounds, nor were they forged in the secrecy of the Raven Guard or Alpha Legion. They were an army of adaptable, efficient, and highly coordinated soldiers. Even in their earliest days, they exhibited a degree of internal organization and battlefield flexibility that would later become their defining trait. During the early years of the Great Crusade, they carved a bloody path across the stars in the Emperor's name. In these formative years, they were known as the Warborn, a title befitting their rapid expansion and early conquests. While many legions floundered in the absence of their Primarch, the 13th adapted. Even before Guilliman's return, they'd begun forming an internal hierarchy that emphasized tactical flexibility and self-sufficiency. Unlike the early lunar wolves or world eaters, they were not reliant on a single commanding figure, but were instead a force of many leaders, functioning as a well-ordered war machine. As the Great Crusade pushed outward, the 13th Legion proved to be one of its most reliable and strategically significant forces. They were the conquerors of entire sectors and the stabilizers of newly annexed territories, making them one of the most successful legions. All Primarchs were shaped by the worlds they landed upon, and Guilliman was no exception. Unlike the desolate death worlds or war-ravaged planets that molded his brothers into warlords, Guilliman's fate was altogether different. He came to rest on Macragge, a civilized world on the edges of the Ultima Segmentum. Macragge was a place of ambition and order. It was ruled by an aristocracy of noble houses, and its people were industrious, orderly, and determined. Guilliman was discovered by Conor, a leading figure in government, who immediately recognized something extraordinary in the child. Under Conor's guidance, Guilliman received a meticulous education in governance, strategy, and warfare, honing his already superhuman instinct and intellect. By the age of 10, he was outthinking seasoned military commanders. By 15, he had led armies against barbarian raiders, crushing them utterly, and by the time the Emperor arrived, Guilliman had already transformed Macragge into a model of stability and productivity. With Guilliman's return, the 13th Legion changed. He wasted no time in applying his talents on a galactic scale, molding his legion into the perfect servants of the Imperium. Now bearing the name Ultramarines, they went on to become the foundation of an empire that would outlast the Emperor himself. Rather than focusing purely on war, he taught his warriors the art of administration, governance, and strategy beyond mere battlefield tactics, and under his command, the Ultramarines became the largest of all the Space Marine legions, numbering over 250,000 Astartes, a staggering figure compared to most other legions, which rarely exceeded 100,000. Their massive numbers were the result of their exceptional gene seed stability and their efficient recruitment systems, which allowed them to replenish losses faster than any other legion. The Great Crusade was the single most ambitious undertaking in human history, a campaign of conquest and reunification spanning the stars, driven by the will of the Emperor and enforced by the might of the Space Marine legions. It was a time of unparalleled glory, of boundless expansion, and of seemingly limitless potential. But it was also an age of war, brutal extermination, and choices that would define the fate of the Imperium for millennia. For the Ultramarines, it was both the crucible that forged their identity and the proving ground that demonstrated their efficiency. They were not as aggressive as the Lunar Wolves or as renowned as the Emperor's children, but they executed campaigns with a high level of logistical precision. Upon Guilliman's return, this efficiency became codified into doctrine. While the Great Crusade saw the expansion of imperial territory, not all worlds could be brought into compliance peacefully. Many required administration, restructuring, and careful oversight to ensure that the imperial truth took root. The Emperor's doctrine of secular rationalism, rejecting all religion and superstition in favor of science, reason, and the belief in humanity's self-determination through unity and progress. Guilliman would transform Ultramar, a collection of planets near Macragge, into a thriving realm, a stable, self-sufficient empire within the Imperium. Due to his Ultramarines, it became the most prosperous, secure, and militarily powerful sectors, a microcosm of what the Emperor had envisioned. While other Primarchs resented Guilliman, the truth was that Ultramar worked because Guilliman and his sons fought for it. Every world they conquered was brought into compliance with brutal efficiency, and every system they claimed was fortified, governed, and stabilized with the full weight of the 13th Legion behind it. Guilliman then led a series of decisive campaigns that showcased the Ultramarines' mastery of large-scale warfare. On the human world of Ogolith, he combined diplomacy with the implied threat of force, and when negotiations failed, executed a decapitation strike that toppled the ruling technocracy with minimal collateral damage, setting a precedent for future compliance operations. Against the Xenos Empire of Gaslith, Guilliman adopted a methodical surgical approach, employing orbital bombardments to cripple infrastructure before ground forces eradicated resistance. In the prolonged cleansing of the Gaslith Nebula, the Ultramarines used naval superiority and coordinated invasions to systematically dismantle enemy logistics, forcing surrender with minimal losses. As the Great Crusade neared its end, Guilliman and his sons continued to expand the Imperium's borders, unaware of the betrayal that was about to unfold. Many of the other legions were drawn into the web of Horus's corruption, but the Ultramarines remained isolated from the political fractures forming at the heart of the Imperium.
Approaching drop zone.
Few could match the Ultramarines in their ability to wage war across all battlefields and scenarios, as they wielded the finest weapons and war gear available. The bolt gun remained the primary weapon, a .75 caliber armor-piercing firearm that delivered devastating explosive rounds with pinpoint accuracy. In close combat, officers and veterans are often armed with power swords, high-energy melee weapons capable of slicing through ceramide armor, or chain swords, brutal weapons designed for relentless close-quarters engagements. For battlefield flexibility, Devastator squads are armed with an array of heavy weapons, from plasma cannons and missile launchers to las cannons, ensuring they can counter enemy armor, infantry, and fortifications with devastating firepower. Specialist squads wield plasma guns, delivering powerful high-energy shots or melter weapons designed for breaching enemy vehicles and strongholds. The Ultramarines also field elite warriors in Terminator armor, deploying in dreadnought suits, granting them near impenetrable protection and overwhelming offensive capability in heavy assault operations. On the battlefield, they bring their full armored might to bear. Land Raiders, Repulsor Executioners, and Predator tanks provide the firepower necessary to break enemy lines, while dreadnoughts bring the wisdom and resilience of ancient warriors to the battlefield. As a fleet-based chapter, the Ultramarines extend their power far beyond planetary warfare. They command an extensive navy consisting of battle barges, strike cruisers, and escort ships, allowing them to wage war across entire star systems. Their ability to conduct orbital insertions, fleet engagements, and rapid planetary deployments ensure that no enemy is beyond their reach. In every aspect of war, the Ultramarines embody balance, efficiency, and supremacy. Their weapons and war gear, a direct reflection of their philosophy, not to fight for the sake of war, but to master it completely. Unlike many chapters that specialize in a singular method of combat, such as the World Eater's Berserker Fury or the Raven Guard's Stealth, the Ultramarines embody the ideal of combined arms warfare, executing a perfectly balanced and synergistic battlefield strategy. This ensures that every Ultramarine is trained to adapt to any enemy, any terrain, and any situation with absolute efficacy. At the heart of their doctrine is tactical flexibility. They do not commit to reckless charges or rigid battle formations. Instead, they deploy a harmonized force of tactical, assault, and devastator squads. Devastator squads provide suppressive fire, laying down devastating volleys of plasma, heavy bolter, and las cannon fire to pin the enemy in place. Tactical squads advance undercover, maneuvering into superior positions to engage at mid-range with bolters. When the time is right, assault marines or vanguard veterans close the distance, executing the decisive melee strikes that break enemy formations. They also excel in siege and urban warfare, despite not being specialists like the Iron Warriors. When breaking enemy fortifications, they employ Vindicators, Demolisher cannons, and Thunderfire cannons, targeting weak points with accuracy. In urban combat, their controlled formations allow them to clear cityscapes, advancing room by room with tactical and intercessor squads to eliminate threats without unnecessary losses. Their fleet superiority further reinforces their battlefield dominance. The Ultramarines maintain one of the best equipped naval forces in the Imperium, allowing them to dictate the flow of battle before they even set foot on the ground. Orbital fire support, Thunderhawk insertions, and drop pod assaults enable them to establish immediate footholds on hostile worlds and control engagements from the outset. Their ability to impeccably coordinate space and ground operations make them a force few enemies can counter effectively. They also maintain flawless logistical support, reflected in their meticulous supply lines, reinforcement cycles, and war zone management. They do not overextend or commit forces blindly. Every battle is calculated, every move made with an understanding of the larger war. They wage battle like a chess match, anticipating enemy strategies and maintaining reserves to counter unexpected developments. Another defining aspect of their warfare is leadership and tactical initiative. Every Ultramarine is trained not just as a soldier, but as a commander. If a leader falls, the next in line steps up, ensuring that their forces remain cohesive and effective even in the most chaotic engagements.
message. Brief me.
The Horus Heresy was the greatest crisis the Imperium had ever faced, a catastrophic civil war that shattered the Emperor's dream of unity and nearly destroyed the Imperium itself. The betrayal of half the Space Marine legions, led by the Warmaster Horus, turned the Great Crusade from a campaign of conquest into a brutal, galaxy-spanning fratricide. The vast numbers and logistical superiority of the Ultramarines meant that if they'd reached Terra in time, the heresy could have ended before it truly began. Horus understood this. The Warmaster knew that while the Lunar Wolves, Death Guard, Emperor's Children, and other traitor legions could devastate Loyalist forces in the early stages, they would ultimately be crushed if the Ultramarines arrived to reinforce Terra. They had to be removed from the war before it began, and so, to achieve this, Horus and his chief conspirators, Lorgar and the Word-Bearers, enacted a grand deception. The Ultramarines, stationed in the eastern reaches of the Imperium, were ordered by Imperial command to gather at Calth, one of the key bastions of Ultramar, to launch a campaign against an emerging Xenos threat. The order seemed legitimate, and Guilliman followed it without hesitation. But it was a trap. As the Ultramarines assembled at Calth, the Word-Bearers turned on them in an act of brutal treachery. Lorgar, Primarch of the Word-Bearers, had long resented Guilliman and his legion. Where Guilliman preached reason, order, and the imperial truth, Lorgar had descended into religious fanaticism, worshipping the dark gods of the warp. The rivalry between the two legions had simmered for decades, but at Calth it erupted into all-out war. Without warning, the Word-Bearers attacked with orbital bombardments, sabotage and direct assaults on Ultramarine command structures, shattering the legion's formations and butchering their forces in a moment of betrayal. The battle was unlike anything the Ultramarines had faced before. They were not fighting rebels or Xenos. They were fighting fellow Astartes, warriors trained in the same methods of war, but backed by chaos itself. The Word-Bearers had spent decades preparing for this moment, and they unleashed their full arsenal, demonic incursions, psychic horrors, and warp-fueled monstrosities to bring the Ultramarines to ruin. Calth burned, and the devastation was immense. The Word-Bearers poisoned the sun, rendering the world permanently hostile, and the Ultramarines suffered catastrophic losses. But Guilliman did not fall, and the Ultramarines rallied. They held the line, counterattacked, and drove the Word-Bearers from the system. Though the cost was high, the Ultramarines proved their resilience. Calth was ruined, but not lost, and though the Word-Bearers delayed Guilliman, they had failed to destroy him. However, the true scale of the heresy was only just becoming clear. With Terra under siege and the Emperor cut off, Guilliman faced an impossible dilemma. The Imperium was falling apart. The Warmaster had torn the galaxy in half, and for the first time in history, there was no certainty that the Emperor would prevail. Faced with this reality, he made a fateful decision, one that still remains controversial. He established Imperium Secundus. With the Imperium's core worlds in flames, Guilliman saw no alternative but to create a backup empire, a second Imperium, ruled from Ultramar. He believed that if Terra fell, humanity needed a leader, a government, and a military force to continue the war against chaos. But even among his own allies, it was divisive. Guilliman declared Sanguinius, Primarch of the Blood Angels, as regent of Imperium Secundus, believing him to be the only Primarch with the wisdom and nobility to rule in the Emperor's absence. But not all agreed. The Lion, Primarch of the Dark Angels, challenged Guilliman's vision, arguing that the Imperium's strength came from its unity, not its division. And so the three Primarchs, Guilliman, Sanguinius, and the Lion, engaged in a fragile alliance, one constantly tested by their differing philosophies. Then came the revelation. when word finally arrived that the Emperor still lived, Imperium Secundus was immediately dissolved. Guilliman, relieved, abandoned his experiment and turned his full focus toward retaking the Imperium from the traitors. As his forces prepared to reinforce the Emperor, they then received the worst possible news. The Siege of Terror was over, and the Emperor had confronted Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit, but the war ended in devastation. The Emperor was mortally wounded, Horus was slain, and the traitor legions had fled into the warp. For Guilliman, this was a bitter pill to swallow. All their discipline, all their strength, all their sacrifice, and they arrived too late to make a difference, and while Terror had survived, the Imperium was shattered. The Emperor now sat upon the Golden Throne, unable to speak or move, and half the Space Marine legions had turned traitor. The Imperial government was in chaos, and the Imperium was no longer whole. It was a corpse empire, limping toward an uncertain future. In that moment, Guilliman understood his true purpose. If the Imperium was to endure, it needed more than warriors. The time of the Great Crusade was over. The age of the Codex Astartes had begun.
Victory. That is what the preachers cry from the spires of their temples. What commanders tell the soldiers in their service. The Indomitus Crusade meets with triumph after triumph. Day by day we tear Imperium Nihilus from the despoiler's grip. And though we are beset on all sides, with each battle we drive back the mutant, the heretic, the alien.
With the Imperium on the brink of collapse, Guilliman took over, not as Emperor, but as Lord Commander of the Imperium, the de facto ruler of mankind. He saw that if the Imperium was to survive, it needed reform. It was in this moment that he made another controversial and consequential decision in Imperial history: the division of the legions, the creation of the Codex Astartes, and the restructuring of military forces into what would become the modern Adeptus Astartes. The legions had been the Emperor's greatest weapon, but they had also been his greatest liability. The Horus Heresy proved that an army of genetically engineered warriors bound to the will of a single Primarch was too dangerous. When the Primarchs were loyal, the Imperium flourished. When they turned against it, entire sectors were burned. Guilliman recognized that if another Primarch or Warmaster turned traitor, the Imperium might not survive a second time. The solution was clear. The legions had to be broken apart into smaller, more manageable forces, each powerful but none capable of bringing the Imperium to its knees. The decision was opposed by many. The Imperial Fist Rogel Dawn saw it as a betrayal of the Legion's purpose. The White Scar's Jagatai Khan was indifferent, believing his warriors would follow him regardless of bureaucratic decree. But some, like the Raven Guard's Corvus Corax and the Salamander's Vulcan, saw wisdom in Guilliman's decision. They had witnessed firsthand the devastation wrought by the Warmaster's treachery, and they understood that the Imperium's survival required stability above all else. And so, despite the opposition, Guilliman pressed forward. The legions were dissolved, and in their place, the Second Founding was enacted. Each Space Marine Legion was broken down into chapters, self-sufficient forces of 1,000 Astartes each, led by their own chapter masters. Each chapter was to be independent, answering only to the High Lords of Terror and the Adeptus Administratum, rather than to any single Primarch. The Ultramarines, being the largest, created the most successor chapters, forming the foundation of what would become the primogenitor chapters, direct descendants of Guilliman's own warriors. The Imperial Fists were divided, with the formation of chapters like the Crimson Fists and the Black Templars, the latter of which openly rejected Guilliman's reforms and continued to operate as a de facto legion. The Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and White Scars followed suit, though many of their successor chapters retained close ties to their parent legions, while the Raven Guard and Salamanders also accepted their new structure without much resistance. With the legions now fragmented, Guilliman then penned the most comprehensive military doctrine in Imperial history, the Codex Astartes. This massive volume of war was more than just a set of rules. It was a philosophy, a guide to warfare, and a blueprint for the Imperium's military future. The Codex Astartes laid out everything: the structure of a chapter, from its leadership down to individual squad formations, the roles and battlefield responsibilities, the standardized training regimens for new recruits, to the rules of engagement, strategic doctrines, and operational protocols for every possible battlefield scenario. Guilliman's vision was proficiency and malleability. No longer would Space Marine forces operate on instinct alone. Every battle, every campaign would follow the principles of tactical supremacy. The Codex Astartes also introduced many of the combat doctrines that define modern Space Marine warfare, including the use of combined arms warfare, ensuring that tactical Marines, Devastator squads, and assault forces operated in perfect synergy, the importance of rapid deployment, utilizing drop pods, Thunderhawks, and fleet superiority to control the battlefield before the enemy could react, and the assembly of a campaign, from initial reconnaissance to final extermination operations. This level of detail ensured that even chapters without any direct connection to Guilliman's lineage could benefit from the wisdom he developed over centuries of warfare. While some chapters, such as the Space Wolves and Black Templars, openly rejected the Codex's rigid structure, most of the Adeptus Astartes embraced it, shaping the very foundation of the modern Imperium's military doctrine. The heresy was over, but the war was not. The Imperium was in ruins, and the traitor legions, though defeated, had not been destroyed. With the Emperor entombed upon the Golden Throne, the Loyalist legions turned their fury upon their fallen brothers, launching the Scouring, a galaxy-spanning campaign to reclaim lost Imperial territory. The Ultramarines led many of these campaigns, and Guilliman's warriors waged war across the ruined stars, reclaiming planets lost to the Warmaster's treachery and crushing the last remnants of the traitor legions. The Scouring had driven the traitor legions into the shadows, forcing them into the Eye of Terror. Even in retreat, the remnants of the Horus Heresy sought vengeance, ruin, and chaos. It was in this turbulent era, in the year 121 M31, that Roboute Guilliman and the Ultramarines faced one of their most bitter conflicts, the Battle of Thessaly. Guilliman confronted one of his most despicable foes, the depraved demon Primarch Fulgrim and his corrupted Emperor's children. Once brothers in the Great Crusade, Fulgrim had since cast aside his humanity, surrendering himself fully to the dark temptations of chaos. He was now a being of inhuman grace and eldritch horror, his form twisted by Slanesh into something both mesmerizing and monstrous. When they met in combat, it was a battle between two opposing ideologies, discipline against decadence, order against excess, duty against corruption. The fight was brutal and merciless, but in the end, Fulgrim struck the fatal blow. With a chaos-tainted blade, he delivered a devastating laceration across Guilliman's throat, a wound so severe that his enhanced physiology could not counteract the poison now searing through his body. The demigod was rushed back to Macragge, but his sons refused to let him die. With no way to save him, they entombed him in temporal stasis, locking him in a moment between life and death, held in the Temple of Correction. There Guilliman sat in silence, a figure frozen in time, waiting for a salvation that many believed would never come. And as the millennia dragged on, the Imperium decayed around him, spiraling further into stagnation, corruption, and blind faith. The Imperium that Guilliman had fought to build was gone. In its place stood a vast bloated empire of zealots and bureaucrats, more concerned with dogma than progress, superstition than governance. His father was now a god in the eyes of the people, and Guilliman was worshipped as a blessed son of divinity, a saint locked in an eternal vigil. For 10,000 years, the avenging sun waited, unable to act as the Imperium crumbled under the weight of its own excesses. As the Imperium entered the Nova Terra Interregnum and the Age of Apostasy, civil war once again threatened its unity. The Empire was being torn apart from within, fractured by religious divisions, political rivalries, and rogue warlords. Throughout these dark centuries, the Ultramarines remained a beacon of stability, refusing to be drawn into factionalism. They fought to preserve imperial order, often acting as neutral arbiters in conflicts that could have shattered the Imperium entirely. A great test in the chapter's history came in M41, with the arrival of the High Fleet Behemoth, the first Tyranid invasion of the Imperium. The Tyranids were not a conventional enemy. They consumed entire star systems, stripping worlds of all life and leaving nothing but barren husks in their wake. Macragge itself became the battleground. The first company of the Ultramarines held the line, fighting to the last man as the Tyranid swarms overwhelmed them, and through sheer tactical brilliance and resilience, they destroyed the High Fleet Behemoth, proving that the Tyranids were not unstoppable. But the cost was enormous. The Ultramarines lost nearly their entire first company, a wound that would take centuries to heal. The 41st millennium was drawing to a close, and the Imperium stood on the precipice of annihilation. The 13th Black Crusade shattered the Cadian Gate, and for the first time since the Heresy, the Eye of Terror expanded, splitting the galaxy in two with the birth of the Cicatrix Maledictum. The Imperium Nihilus, the dark half of the Imperium, was cut off from Terra, isolated from reinforcements and drowning in the horrors of chaos. The Ultramarines stood against the tide, fighting to hold back the tides of the Death Guard, Word-Bearers and Black Legion, but it was not enough. The Imperium needed their Primarch.
In the spires and the slums, sing of victory. Victory as the galaxy burns. Victory as the Imperium rots around us. Victory as humanity rages against the dying of the light. Victory.
After 10,000 years, the unthinkable happened. Roboute Guilliman returned. Revived by Archmagos, Belisarius Cawl, and the Ynnari, he awoke to a galaxy that was nothing like the one he'd left. The codex he had written had been twisted into rigid dogma, and the Imperium had become a bureaucratic nightmare ruled by zealots and sycophants. Belisarius Cawl had also labored in secret, working from the Emperor's forgotten designs. Using them, he created an entirely new generation of Space Marines, taller, stronger, faster, and more resilient than their predecessors. Equipped with Mark X power armor, armed with the finest weapons that Mechanicus could forge, and genetically enhanced beyond even the original legions, the Primaris Space Marines were unleashed. To Guilliman, they were the reinforcements he'd been denied during the Horus Heresy. To the Imperium, they were a lifeline. Horrified at the state of the Imperium, Guilliman launched the Indomitus Crusade, leading the Ultramarines and their successors on a galaxy-spanning campaign to reclaim lost Imperial territory and stabilize the crumbling Empire. The Indomitus Crusade was a campaign fought on a scale unseen since the Great Crusade. Guilliman divided his forces into multiple battle groups, each tasked with reclaiming key sectors, purging chaos infestations, and reinforcing Imperial strongholds. For over 100 years, millions of Imperial soldiers and Astartes fought to keep the Imperium from crumbling into oblivion. But Guilliman knew that war alone would not be enough, and so he took command, naming himself Lord Regent of the Imperium. The High Lords of Terror, corrupt and ineffectual, clung to their power, resisting Guilliman's reforms. The ecclesiarchy saw him as both a savior and a threat, worshipping him as the avenging son, while also fearing his disdain for religious fanaticism. The Inquisition did not trust him. The Space Marines did not all accept his Primaris reinforcements. Guilliman, it seems, was alone, standing against the very empire he was trying to save. But he did not break. Even as war consumed the stars, even as his own people resisted his rule, he endured. Now Guilliman and the Ultramarines fight in an age darker than any before. The Great Rift has torn the galaxy in half, the Necrons have awakened, and chaos threatens to consume all of reality. The Imperium is more besieged than ever, its enemies more powerful than at any point in history, but the Ultramarines endure. They stand at the forefront, fighting to reclaim the Imperium's shattered dominion. For 10,000 years, they have fought for order, for stability, for humanity's survival. They are the keepers of civilization, the shield against the darkness, and the last best hope of the Imperium.